And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Jesse Beltran, near-death experiencer, certified master hypnotist, and leading expert in the fields of frequencies, implant technology, and Havana syndrome. He currently serves as the President of Mind Nexus, where he spearheads transformative seminars that bridge the gap between science, space, and spirituality. Jesse, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me your platform.
Jesse, if you don't mind, let's first start with your NDE before we go into other topics.
Well, I'm originally from Sacramento, California, was born and raised, and I was 6 years old, and I had a tonsillectomy and had just been discharged from the hospital, and the doctors had talked to my mother and father what the expectations were, what they needed to do when they took me home. And the doctor just advised to keep me quiet and just to feed me ice cream. And so I remember being discharged and went home, and I went to bed that evening. And when I woke up in the morning, I had a twin-size bed. I sat up, and all I could see was blood completely covering my sheets. The only portion that was white was where my body had laid over it. And as a 6-year-old boy, this was terrifying to me. And all I did was yell, "Mom!" And as soon as I did that, I just started to hemorrhage. And my mother and father ran into the room. I'm vomiting blood, and it's like a fire hose. And they scoop me up, take me to the bathroom, hoping that the bleeding would stop. It didn't. It continued to just throw up just huge amounts of blood. So my father scooped me up in a blanket so I could continue to throw up into the blanket. And he had a 57 Chevy, and he ran outside, threw me on the floorboard of the back seat. And as I'm continuing to vomit, he just hauls as fast as he can to the hospital, blowing red lights. Apparently, my mother had called the ER that I was on my way, and I remember my father running, and to this day it still gets kind of emotional, and he's crying, and you don't often see my father crying, and they're waiting for me, and he's saying, "Please save my son, please save my son." So they throw me on the gurney, rush me into the OR. And next thing I know, I hear, "We're losing him, we're losing him." And everything goes black. Just like you hear the stories, I raise up to the corner of the operating room. I'm watching them doing CPR on me. Well, this was before it went black. I'm raising up and watching them doing CPR on me, and then everything goes black. And then I see this light, and as a 6-year-old boy, I'm drawn to it, and I go to the light. And when I got into that light, all I experienced was this, a type of love that I can't describe. It was just unconditional love, just being surrounded by that energy. And I tell people, if you think about the kind of love that a mother and a father has for a child, or a child of that age has for their parents, mom and dad are their world, their safety net, everything. And so I'm in this light, feeling this kind of love that I've never experienced. And a voice says to me, it was a male voice, and it says to me, "I'm sorry, it's not your time. You have to go back." And this is where I say, this is how you measured this kind of love that was there. As a 6-year-old boy, like I said, mom and dad is your world, you're your everything. And kind of love that I experienced there was not even comparable. It was just so much more than that. And I remember saying, and I'm crying, and I'm saying to this voice that I don't want to go back. I want to stay here. And then again, he says, I'm sorry, it's not your time. And then I start to fall, hit the operating table. I can hear everyone saying, Jesse, we've got him back. We've got him back. And that was my NDE experience. And it, from a philosophical perspective, it really, as I got older, as I rehashed that experience, I started to question whether or not there was such thing as free will, because that's what's supposed to make us human. But I was this 6-year-old child who said, I don't want to go back. I want to stay here. And I was not allowed to utilize free will. And so it really brings a lot of philosophical perspectives on whether or not, are we really truly beings of free will? Or is there an ultimate programmer who really knows what's going to happen in the future? And I guess we can use the term called destiny. And is destiny a thing of chance, or is destiny a thing that's pre-programmed? And that's my experience.
Jesse, thank you for sharing your experience. I'm pretty sure you thought about it over the years. Who do you think that voice was that told you to go back?
My belief that it was God. I truly believe that that voice was God.
Have you seen any evidence of destiny in your life since you've been back?
I would have to say yes. People, I've had discussions about this topic, about free will, and there's all kinds of opinions, and the most common opinion that I hear is that you were just a child soul. You didn't have the experiences to make a decision whether or not to stay there or not was an appropriate position to take. And through my life, I've been blessed with many, many great opportunities and skill sets and experiences. And one of them being is that I became a firefighter paramedic, and I was instrumental in bringing the firefighter transportation program to the counties of Sacramento, both in Elk Grove City and in the city of Sacramento, because of some risks that I took. There was some political stuff going on between the private ambulances and the fire departments. And, I at that time, I worked for both. But I came across a call in a little town called Wilton, just outside of Elk Grove, California, where there was a 7-year-old girl who was complaining of chest pain. And I just figured it was going to be a cold or something like that. But I was surprised when I got there. She had a zipper on her chest, means that she had heart surgery. So I knew that this was an unusual situation. You don't typically see children with open heart surgery scars on them. And when I put her on the heart monitor, she had what was called a wide QRS, a very wide, slow moving, but going up and down on the monitor, which, me not knowing her current history or any exposure to her, looks like slow, what we call slow VTAC, and called for the ETA of the ambulance, and the ambulance was 45 minutes away, and it was much too long of a wait for me, and I didn't feel comfortable with it. So we had a white van there, and the chief was there, and the fire engine was there, and I decided to throw that little girl in the back of the white van, and the chief was going to stay in front of it, and the engine was going to be behind us, and we went lights and sirens to the hospital. And the dispatch center was the private ambulance company, and they knew that I was the paramedic on this call, but I was also the operations manager for the private ambulance. But I was working a shift for the fire department on that day. And ultimately what happened is the private ambulances, the upper ups decided to terminate me for conflict of interest. I was all over the newspaper as a person putting this little girl in a unsanctioned ambulance, is what they called it. But ultimately what happened is there were some court cases and lawsuits, and ultimately I testified, and there was a lot of other things going on in the backgrounds politically. And so what ultimately happened because of that lawsuit and my testimony and the testimony of others, the fire departments won, and that's how the fire services started doing paramedic transportation services. So when I look at that, we've probably saved hundreds, maybe even thousands of lives to this day, because this was over 2 decades ago, almost 3 decades ago, that this transpired. And then we leads into what I'm doing now. And what I do now is helping people, again, people who don't have a voice. And based on my experience as a paramedic and able to obtain objective data, I'm continuing that journey. So ultimately, I think I say now that God sent me back for a reason.
Well, how did you get into hypnotherapy?
I got into hypnotherapy because I was fascinated by someone I look up to. His name was Dr. Richard Bandler. He also had a partner, Granger, and they were the creators of a process called neuro-linguistic programming. And I found it very fascinating because it really dug deep into how the human psyche worked, how the human brain worked, how language patterns can influence humans, and how it would be beneficial for me for people who were going through either traumas or something that I could still extend a way to help them. And that's how I started hypnosis. And later on, I became a certified master hypnotist with my diploma in hypnotherapy from the first accredited college in hypnotherapy down in Calabasas, California, which is called HMI.
Did you have any after effects from your NDE that could be considered psychic or paranormal?
It's interesting you should ask that. I've never been asked that before. But I would say that I have this innate ability to have this very acute intuition. And in fact, the last day, I'm now retired as a fire medic. I used to work out of Station 10 in South Sacramento. And one of my last shifts there, I had, I don't know what to call it, but I'll tell you the story. Typically, I'm the last one to go to bed, and I was in a company where you had an engine company, a truck company, and an ambulance. I had seniority, so I was a paramedic on the truck company, and we usually only go out at night on true emergencies. But on this night, something different happens. I went to bed first. I was really tired, and then eventually everyone else went to bed. But while I was in the dorm, I started to have this experience where this woman, she was an Asian woman with reddish orange hair, and she was holding a naked baby at the end of my bed. And she's shaking my bed. And I'm freaked out because I'm going, what the hell are you doing in here? Not thinking about, what I'm really seeing. And she's very stoic, and she's just holding this naked baby. And she then walks to the left side of my bed, starts shaking the bed, and she's still holding this baby. And I'm saying, get away from me. What are you doing in here? And she goes back to the end of the bed, does the same thing, shakes the bed. And I'm still saying, what are you doing here? And in the dorm itself, everyone's now hearing me yell. And then she comes to the right side of my bed, but this time a tear runs down her face. And then she turns to walk away. And I yell, give me the baby. And as soon as I did that, the alarm goes off, and it says engine 10, code 2. Code 2 just means just get there when you can, not an emergency. And then all of a sudden, my captain on the truck, his name was Mike Galvin, gets up and he goes, truck, we're taking this call. He wanted to be nice and let the engine company sleep. because they run a ton of calls throughout the night, and we're spoiled for the most part, and we get to sleep all night. So I'm like, oh, shoot. Okay, that must have been a dream. So I hop into my turnouts, go to the truck company. We didn't hear what the call was. And then my captain gets into the truck and he says, let's just go ahead out and make a right. And I go, Captain Galvin, I go, is this a maternity call by any chance? And he goes, yeah, how'd you know? And I said, I think we better go code 3. We shouldn't be going code 2 on a maternity. We don't know what's going on there. But in my mind, I'm now has this instinct that this is going to be a very serious call. And as we continue down code 2, fire dispatch comes on and says, Captain Galvin goes, fire dispatch, be advised, we're going to respond code 3 because this is a maternity call. So we're going, and as we're going code 3 lights and sirens, fire dispatch comes on truck 10, and he goes, truck 10, and they go, confirming you're responding code 3, and he goes, that's affirmative. And then they come in, they say over the radio, be advised, baby not breathing. So we get there. It's an Asian woman. She has black hair. I'm not sure what the orange hair was about at that time. Baby's not breathing. Baby's already been delivered, and she's bleeding out. So I immediately cut the cord. We started aggressive warming, started doing chest compressions on the baby. I told the captain, you know what, we're going to need a second ambulance. I can't do 2 critical patients at one time. So we ended up going code 3 to UC Davis and started getting a pulse back, eventually get the baby to the ER, and we were able to save the baby. Now, this was about 2:33 in the morning. And what typically happens when people run these calls, they get back to the station, all they want to do is go back to sleep. So I was a paramedic, and as a paramedic, you have to go on the ambulance, particularly if it's a critical call. And so I write my reports. The ambulance takes me back, and I see that the captain's light is still on. And I go, it's like 4 in the morning. Why isn't he in bed? And so I walk in there, and he goes, Beltran. I go, yeah, Captain. He goes, come here, sit down. And he goes, are you okay? And I go, yeah, why? And he goes, how'd you know that this was a maternity call? And he goes, you were yelling in the dorm. Did you know that? And I go, yeah. So I told him this exact story that I told you. And then he says to me, no. And I said to him, and I go, but the strange thing is, everything was as it says, but that woman had black hair. The woman that was in our dorm had this orange reddish hair. And he says, did you say orange reddish hair? And I said, yes. He says, did you see the twins in the corner of the room? And I said, what twins? I was so focused on that baby not breathing. And this is a mistake on my part, 'cause typically we look at the entire scene. I didn't this time because I wanted to save this baby. And he says, it was twin boys, Asian boys, and they had orange hair. And so that's not the first time I've had things like that happen, but it kind of makes you wonder. That's why I call it heightened intuitiveness is a sense that I get.
And it can even make one think about free will again, because you're seeing the future and something that's already happened,
Correct. So, and like I said, you still contemplate, is that free will or is that pre-programmed destiny? It's hard to say.
As a hypnotherapist, what are some of the strangest things that you've seen?
Probably in regression therapy. Now, in my college, we do regression a little bit differently. Most, when you hear about hypnosis and regression, it's a very strict timeline that you guide people back when they're in trance into past lives. With regression therapy, it's a little bit different. We do have you go and visit past lives, but we have you, while you're in trance, visit the past life that is most relevant to this life. So if you are experiencing issues like claustrophobia, you're afraid of spiders, whatever that issue may be, you're going through some trauma, or you have relationships that keep cycling over and over again, the same types of phenomena where they can be toxic, whatever that may be. Our methodology of therapy, regression therapy, is to attach you to the past life that is most relevant to the answers that you seek in this life. And typically when I do this, I usually always have someone regress back into a human form. And my last two cases were very, very different. The first one that I'll talk about is a young lady who's very has this bright spirit about her. She's her spirit is very gravitational with other beings, other people, and I would call her. She's a sensitive, and she wanted to deal with some issues that she was experiencing here in this life, and wanted to do regression therapy. And so typically, like I said, I usually have people regress back into human form, but hers was the first time that it wasn't. And what was really unusual about this, during this regression, the environment also changed. So we regressed her, and she regressed back into this light being, a light form. And it was very reminiscent to me about my near-death experience, because it reminded me of that environment that I was in. And all she could describe herself as this light being around other light beings. And it was like unconditional love. But what was strange is we had cameras rolling, and we had another person in the room, and the camera person had left the room before this happened. And the cameras were just documenting what was going on in the regression. And we could feel electricity in the environment. It's the only way I can explain it. Your hairs were standing on end. Now, the person who was in the room didn't realize what was going on, but he said he could feel this reverberation through his chest, and his hair were standing on end. When the camera person walked in, they immediately felt it too. So that was really unusual. And we're actually talking to that individual that we regressed, and we would like to put up some other equipment, because we want to see if that phenomenon will happen again if we go back to that lifetime. We were going to use things like thermal FLIR monitors, spectrum analyzers and things, and then we're going to film it again. So that was an unusual one. And now, just to share with your audience, before September of this year, I was a hardcore skeptic on the UFO phenomenon. And I tell people now that I'm about a 90% believer, 10% still analytical, just in case. But I did a regression at a retreat we hold, and we do this with Cosmic Clarity Connections, or the Mind Nexus Live is our brand. And we had a retreat, and I did what we call frequency scanning. We can talk a little bit about that later, but there was an individual there who wanted to have a regression done. And what was interesting about him, he felt that this was his first visit in human form. This was his first time in human form. And, I'm not critical what people's belief systems are. They are what they are. I can't confirm or deny that. It's his experience. So we did a regression. And each life that he went to that was most relevant to this one were all in what I would describe as an ET form. None of them were bad for him as an experience. They were all loving environments, with one exception. It was a warning where he said in one of the past lives they warned that there is an attack on humanity, and that was the message that he brought back to this life. But those two would be probably the most unusual ones that I've had in regression.
Now, you also are involved in some sort of UFO research, right?
Yes, it's a I said it's a multitude of crosshairs, because most recently, there's a book out there by Lou Elizondo called Eminent, and in that book it talks about an alien implant being removed from a veteran at the VA hospital, and in the description it talks about that this alien implant had a membrane around it that seemed to move, and I have been following a phenomenon that has been happening in the United States since 2009. Now, the reason I say it's crosshairs because it intersects the possibilities of, what is this? Is this an alien phenomenon that people are saying that they're having these episodes of loss of time, or they feel they've been abducted or had an ET experience, and then all of a sudden there's an implant in them. And recently, the Department of Homeland Security held a hearing in May 8th of 2024, and retired Lieutenant Colonel Greg Edgreen gave testimony about a phenomenon that was happening to our diplomats in Havana, Cuba. And in 2016, our diplomats were complaining about this weird phenomenon where they were having these acute sounds, and followed by severe head pain, short-term, long-term memory loss, electrical shocks. And what they weren't saying is these people were actually hearing voices in some of the cases. And initially, the United States government didn't give it any credence. They wrote it off as some type of psychosis or mass hysteria phenomenon. At one point, they even blamed it on crickets. But Colonel Edgreen gave testimony that this phenomenon is real. It is happening to not only our diplomats, it's happening to our best of the best in our CIA, our FBI, and there are a couple of cases of Congress members who are being afflicted with this. And they believe that it was some directed energy weapon. And in some cases it was. Now, I've been following this phenomenon of American citizens coming to me with these exact same symptoms. And we've been following it since 2009. A gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall, who's the author of 2 books. The first book is A New Breed: Satellite Terrorism in America. And the second book is Guinea Pigs: Technologies of Control. And he writes a couple of chapters in there about what I was doing in my efforts in trying to help people. Now, what I did when I met Dr. Hall, and is I asked, we talked about this topic, and I said, well, why isn't anything being done? And the reason nothing was being done, because if you went to your doctor, which we're all taught to do, and give these complaints, you're going to get diagnosed with a mental disorder, or you're going to be put on drugs. And these people were really, really suffering. And they were just being re-victimized again by this phenomenon. Colonel Edgreen testified to Congress because they were asking, so is this some type of covert weapon phenomenon that's happening here in the homeland? And he said, absolutely, that this is basically these long duration experiences that people are having. And right now they're saying it only happens to federal employees. What I've been doing with my work is saying, no, this is not only federal employees, it's also happening to civilians. And what he says that this is a slow kill, that it's made to make people look like they're crazy. Now, why do I say this intersects the UFO phenomenon? Is because what Dr. Hall was doing, because people were saying that there's some signal they feel that's being sent to them, he said, well, we should be able to detect it. And he was doing it very sporadically, where he was doing what's called a radio frequency scan. And I said, well, why don't we do something that turns this stuff into tangible, objective data? So I started holding meetings in Sacramento, California. I said, hey, if you're experiencing these symptoms or having anything like this, come out and talk to us. And I was surprised. I expected a handful of people. And it turned out that 100 people showed up at our first meeting. And then they all had the same exact complaints as the Havana syndrome, or anomalous health incidences, victims that Colonel Edgreen talks about, and Congress was holding a hearing on. And so they were all exactly the same with very little deviation. So I knew that we had something. And so we decided to do a radio frequency testing on a mass scale in the field. And so we would do a preliminary RF scan around a person's field and see if we came up with anything. And we started in Davis, California, and 300 people showed up. And I was just amazed. And so what the data started showing is that the people that were most affected were Caucasian females in their 40s, highly educated, recently single, widowed, or divorced. Then it was Caucasian males, then African American females, African American males, Asians, and it dwindled down from there. We did this across the United States, in the Midwest with the exact same results until we got to Chicago. The Caucasian and African American criteria flipped, and then that remained consistent all the way to the East Coast with one exception. That was in Virginia. I was invited to do this RF testing with a group of folks, and they were all military subcontractors. They were all expressing these same complaints as AHI or Havana syndrome. And so we were doing RF testing there. And that's when I started testing for suggestibility. And the reason I was testing for suggestibility is I noticed that my journey across the United States, that people that were most affected, and I was getting doctors, lawyers, judges, blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, the whole gamut were coming to see me. And what I was noticing, the people that were most devastated were those who were highly suggestible. I've had physicians lose $10 million businesses because they went the traditional route. And what we were doing was outside the scope of medicine. Medicine has their own tasks that they need to do to rule in or out a diagnosis. We were doing a technological aspect of this. My background also, I was and one of the previous owners of one of the third largest ISPs in California, and we did line of sight microwave data through microwave technology. And so I had some experience with these frequencies and understanding how frequencies work. And what the suggestibility aspect is that if you are highly suggestible and you are receiving a signal, and people were coming up positive with, for some reason, at very focal areas around their person of a signal emission, what we believed. And we went through a process in order to get to that point to rule that out.
Let me stop you for one moment because I want to just ask you a couple questions before we get too far along.
Sure.
When you're testing someone for an RF frequency, are you running some sort of electronic scanner to see if something in their body is producing or emitting a radio frequency?
That is exactly what we were doing, and that's what we set out to do. And what I'm going to do is show exactly how that process works. Here, this is a licensed medical professional who came to me who was complaining about experiencing this exact phenomenon. And what you see in my left hand is a JM20 Pro frequency detector. And this is accurate, according to the manufacturer, 1 part per million. And what's unique about this device is that it allows us to do massive amounts of scanning in a day because we live in an ambient environment of frequencies everywhere. So what this allows us to do is to calibrate it down to where you have to be within an inch or two of an emission. And I'm going to show you exactly how that works. So I sped it up, but here's the first area where we came up positive near her temporomandibular joint. And you will see that red light that's flashing. That's an indication that it's picking up a frequency. And in her case, this was a very, very strong emission. And what we're doing is we're trying to isolate what area do we think it's coming from. And so we'll mark it with a sticker, and later I'll demonstrate here in this video, we'll go back with a frequency counter. And then ultimately, in the end, we'll show you exactly how we were able to determine that these are definitely frequencies they were emitting from the human person.
Now
So you notice how she steps away, it goes off.
Now
the lights, but when she comes closer to it, it turns back on. Go ahead.
Now you've tested this device on people and got negatives as well, right? Like so you won't.
That is correct.
So you're not having false positives.
That is correct. But there is a process. We do not bank 100% on this. The preliminary RF scan as being 100% positive that this signal is emitting from you, because we still live in an ambient environment. So we have to find a scientific way to isolate the environment that blocks out these frequencies. So what I'm going to show you here, this is now the frequency counter. You'll notice that this was so strong. She, in her case, was probably one of the strongest detections that we've ever detected in a preliminary scan. And that frequency counter is pinging. Not only is it pinging, but it's also giving us the frequency that we're detecting near that area around her. Okay? But I'm just walking your audience through the process. Now, this is what we call phase 1, phase 2. Now, we'll ask them to get medical imagery after they come up positive. And there's a couple of other tests we do, but this is going to be, this is an anechoic chamber. I was invited by a European government agency to test their diplomats and some family members. And they flew me to Europe, and they wanted me to bring anyone who I felt that was victimized in this way, or they felt that they were subjected to this type of technology. So I had to sign an NDA. They took me to a research university who had what is called an anechoic chamber. And this anechoic chamber is designed and built to block out frequency emissions between 9 kilohertz and 18 gigahertz. So we said, okay, the frequencies that we are detecting are well within that spectrum. So what we did is we used controls. This is a person from the embassy who is not complaining of these symptoms. And when we use the JM20 Pro, we're not detecting anything, and which is what we typically expect. What we also did, you'll see here in a second, is we took the frequency counter. And here's when we knew that we were in the perfect environment. The frequency counter was detecting 0 frequency emissions in this environment. This is what we expect on a control subject. So we took another control subject and did the exact same thing. The smile on my face is because we had 0, because I knew that if we were going to prove that this was an emission from the human person, that once we started bringing in those who tested positive in preliminary scans, that we should see, if it is coming from their person, frequency emissions. So this control also is at 0. Now we're going to take the non-symptomatic person and the symptomatic person and put them in the same environment. And we're going to use the frequency counter because that's what we're testing for. We want to see if the frequency emission is there. And notice how the frequency counter is picking up frequencies. Okay? And we'll gate it down until it hones in on the strongest frequency. Now we're going to use the control. I'm going to have them switch places so we can say that they were standing at the exact same location. And now it's on and it's scanning for frequencies. And it reads 0. This is the first time I've shared this on any podcast, so you're the first.
You mentioned you would follow up with imaging. Is that an MRI, X-ray, CT scan, or what?
So what we've discovered, after we were able to prove 100% that these emissions, for whatever reason, are coming from their person. I'm going to show you what we have found with one of my earliest clients. So I'm going to show you what was determined, because right now all you can say, for whatever reason, there's a frequency emission coming from around their person. You can't really identify anything unless you have radiographic imagery, and which we do. And ultimately, it's still a foreign body until you remove it and identify it. So this is the photomyographic images of a surgery that was done to this young lady who was one of my earliest clients, who came to me with this phenomenon. And there were 3 specimens that were removed from her person. And there was a chain of custody. We wanted to make sure we were on the up and up with everything. And they were initially identified as foreign bodies. And this is what they ended up pulling out. These are implants. These are they're biosensors. And what you're seeing here, these are actually nanowires. These things have become very, very small, and this hasn't always been the case. Usually they were the size of a grain of rice, the Verichip type style, and I'll show you a case that had one like this. Now, all 3 of these were different types of sensors that were pulled from her. And we have currently cases that are going through the court system. One is a military person. Actually, we have a couple of military cases where they're pulling these out of people. And so this is where we're at today. So this is how you asked about my journey about destiny. Once again, I stumbled upon this. And once again, here we are trying to help people who otherwise don't have any resources.
Now, with the woman who had these 3 implants removed, did you go back and do a follow-up RF test and find it to be 0?
She still has 2 more that have to be removed. And she needs a neurosurgeon for those to be done. And she was scheduled, and for some reason at the last minute, they backed out of doing the surgery. So we're still following up with her, and we're still working on that. I wanted to show the audience, this is a case, this is called the Bob Boyce case. And what you're looking at is a cancerous tumor. Bob Boyce was an inventor of a high efficiency engine, and he developed terminal cancer. And when I spoke to Bob, Bob said, Jesse, I just succumbed and I was going to die from this cancer. And he wasn't sure what else was going to happen as far as the invention. And so how he found this is he was in a Faraday cage. It was not as robust as our anechoic chamber, but it's a smaller version of it, a lighter version. And he was testing for RF leakage from his inventions. And the wand went by his shoulder, as you saw that we were testing that woman in her TMJ, and it pinged. So that caused him to go get an x-ray in that area. And when they did the x-ray, they found this at the end of the tweezers is an RFID chip in the middle of the cancerous tumor. He had it removed, and it went to pathology. And I asked, well, Bob, where's the chip? What did pathology say? And he says, well, it disappeared. And he goes, I go, well, I'm not surprised. And he was just happy that his cancer went into remission. He was still going to live. But a few months later, the cancer came back very aggressively. So he went back into the Faraday cage, rescanned his person, and found the second chip. And this time they were smart. They used a chain of custody like we did. And they pulled out that second chip. And the bottom line here is this phenomenon is real. For whatever reason, this is happening out there. And, Bob is now cancer-free after they found the second chip. And so people say, well, wow, this really sounds far-fetched. This is sci-fi. And for the most part, it is, until we had another case in 2019, which was called the Don DeVore case. This is a case that was filed in 2019 in Southern California. Dawn DeVore was a registered nurse who worked for the Department of Corrections. She became a whistleblower. This was filed in September 20th of 2019. We were so blessed. We felt terrible for her, but the same type of implants that were pulled out of my client, similar implants were pulled out of Dawn. And in her lawsuit, she submitted an intercepted document, Exhibit 2, and it's called the IntelliConnection, the security vision of IBM. It's this confidential limited distribution. She was not supposed to get her hands on it. But in this document, it says the control of crime will be paramount concern in the 21st century. We must be ready with our security products when the demand for them becomes popular. Our Research and Development Division has been in contact with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the California Department of Corrections, the Texas Department of Public Safety, and Massachusetts Department of Corrections to run limited trials of the 2020 neurochip implant. We have established representatives of our interests in both management and instructional levels within these departments. Federal regulations do not yet permit testing of implants on prisoners, but we have entered into contractual agreements with privatized healthcare professionals and specified correctional personnel to do limited testing of our products. We have also had major success in privately owned sanitariums with implant technology. We need, however, to expand our testing to research how effective the 2020 neurochip implant performs in those identified as the most aggressive in our society. Limited testing has produced a number of results. In California, several prisoners were identified as members of a security threat group. They were brought to the health services at Pelican Bay and tranquilized with advanced sedatives developed by our Cambridge, Massachusetts laboratories. The implant procedures takes 60 to 90 minutes, depending upon the experience of the technician. We are working on a device which will reduce the time by as much as 60%. The results of the implants on 8 prisoners yielded the following results. Implants served as surveillance monitoring devices for the threat group. Now that's one to pay close attention to, okay? Implants disabled 2 subjects during an assault on correctional staff. Universal side effects in all 8 subjects revealed that when the implant was set and received a signal at 160 megahertz, all subjects became lethargic and slept on an average of 18 to 22 hours per day. This is one of the frequencies we are detecting out there. All subjects refused recreation periods for 14 days. Obviously, if you're lethargic, you're not going to do that. You're not going to exercise. It says each subject was monitored for aggressive activity during the test period, and the findings are conclusive that out of the 8 test subjects exhibited no aggression, even when they were provoked. Each subject experienced only minor bleeding from the nose and ears 48 hours after the implant due to initial adjustment. Each subject had, and here's this important part, each subject had no knowledge of the implant for the test period, and each implant was retrieved under the guise of a medical treatment. So this was done covertly. It should be noted that the test period was for less than 2 months. However, during the period, substantial data was gathered by our research and development team, which suggests that the implants exceeded expectation. I don't need to go through the entire document, but it goes on to say that this experimentation is having in our mental institutions and our correctional facilities, and more specifically at Vacaville Prison here in California. So when people say, well, this sounds like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, we can no longer say that. And so where do the lines cross is what needs to happen. Now, remember, these guys, when they are implanted, they are walking, talking recorders. Not only can they hear everything in your environment, they also can see. As crazy as this sounds, this is the document that was declassified and released in 1974, and I'll go back to the title in a second. But I just want to read these 2 paragraphs real quickly. It says, within our electrophysiological laboratory, we presently have the capability of programming a wide variety of audiovisual stimuli with current recordings of heart rate, both directly in beats per minute, galvanic skin responses, changes, and I won't talk about that. I'm not sure why they're looking at genitalia, but electromyographic responses and alpha and beta brainwaves. We presently are in the process of developing portable biofeedback devices which can be used in self-monitoring in vivo. The planned use of the number of satellite facilities outside of UCLA, notably at Atascadero, Camellia, and Vacaville state hospitals, raised additional questions of control and made it more difficult to monitor carefully the activities of the CSRB. Moreover, Vacaville and Atascadero were state facilities that had attracted substantial notoriety for allegedly unethical procedures over the past several years. Moreover, among the principal figures involved in the formulation of plans for the center were a number of controversial researchers in the field of behavior control technology, notably several psychosurgeons and proponents of electrophysiological methods of behavioral control. One was a researcher who had conducted substantial research in methods of electronic control of human behavior. Where it gets really interesting, and now this was in the 70s, including the use of radio transmitter receivers to determine the location, activities, and even thoughts of the individual using the device. Now, I said I'd go back to the title. This was by our our congressional members back in 1974, is titled Individual Rights and the Federal Role in Behavior Modification, a study prepared by the staff of the Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights of the Committee on the Judiciary, United States Senate, 93rd Congress, second session, okay? I have other documents that have been declassified that actually talk about this technology to the extent that they're even more specifically able to not only read your thoughts, but imprint thought processes. Remember, this is a two-way communication system. If you think about Ewan Cameron back in the MK Ultra days, he was a Canadian psychiatrist hired by the federal government and funded to see whether or not he could erase the human brain or memories and re-imprint them with new memories. He would use things like electroshock therapy, long-term sleep through drug induction, and he would put a helmet on their heads, and then he would put tape recorders in there with themes that are recycled over and over again. And he really messed people up. In fact, there are still court cases going on today in Canada over that issue. Now, think about this today. If we have the capabilities through technology to transmit two-way communication processes through these biosensors, basically making a wide body area network, everyone having these nodes in them. Think about what you can do to someone now. This is basically psychic driving, what Ewan Cameron was doing in its infancy. This is psychic driving on steroids. Now, I talked about why suggestibility was important. There are two cases in the United States. One was of Aaron Alexis, and the other one was Myron May. Aaron Alexis was a U.S. soldier who called me and complained about anomalous health incidences, the exact same symptoms that our diplomats are complaining about. And I did not know what he was going to do. He was very impatient. I told him this was going to be a long process. We need to go basically through everything that I just disclosed to everyone, how we got to where we were today. He wasn't going to have it. When this happens to someone initially, they're either in fight or flight. Aaron Alexis was in fight. He went and he killed 16 people at the Navy Yard on the East Coast. Myron May was an attorney. Same thing, contacted me, wanted some help and guidance. And again, I tried to slow talk them through this process. And I'm not knowing what they were going to do, because if I could have stopped it somehow, I would have. And he ended up killing 3 people at the research facility there at the university. Now, why does this cross sections between the UFO phenomenon and these AHI phenomenon? The documentation is here. We're now pulling out the evidence, and you can imprint memory sets on highly suggestible people. Imprint a memory set that they would not be able to tell the difference on whether or not they really experienced it or not. And so this is why I say this really needs to be delved into. There needs to be a serious discussion amongst humanity about how we deal with this, because the laws are not of technology. Technology is outpacing our laws. There's no comparison right now.
Do you think that this technology was developed by ETs and given to us?
That's the question. Yeah, that's an important question. We know that humans possess this technology. Who does? The United States, Russia, China, and the UK. They all have this technology available to them. The question is, how did they obtain it? How did they get to this point? Was this through the help of non-human intelligence, or was this strictly developed by humans? Nonetheless, with great power comes great responsibility. I hate using that cliche, but it is so true, particularly in this aspect of society.
I'm kind of speechless. It's pretty amazing.
That's usually what I hear.
It's pretty amazing what you just showed us today.
Yeah.
If people want to find out more about this or get in contact with you, are you open to that?
Yes, we are. They can contact us at www.mindnexuslive.com or at cosmicclarityconnections.org. In addition, everything that I've shared with you, and there's a plethora of more information, I'll leave you a link that I leave public to a directory that you can go and read all these materials themselves. A lot of these declassified documents, some are 666 pages, some are 222 pages. One in there is titled New World Vistas. If you go to page 89 of that declassified report, talks about biological processes. It talks about the imprinting of memories and those things. But here's where we are today. And this is why our focus is out there to educate everyone, because the first line of defense, particularly if this happens to you, is knowledge. You knowing and being in touch with your inner spirit, who you truly are inside your inner voice. Knowing what your moral compass is. That is so important, because that is the only way to start the first line of defense for yourself and protecting yourself from being afflicted by this and being manipulated in any way, shape, or form.
Do you have anything else that you're working on that you want people to know about?
There are some things that are happening behind closed doors, but at this point, just imagine it's taking us 15 years to get to this point. And I've been very, very patient for very specific reasons. There are some things happening behind closed doors that I'm hoping that when it does come out, that we're going to help tens of thousands of people. Colonel Egrin, when he gave testimony at the Department of Homeland Security this year, said that this is happening on every continent with the exception of Antarctica.
Well, Jesse, before we wrap it up, is there some way you can give us a positive message out of all of this?
Yes. Remember, during my near-death experience, whatever that was, whoever that was, I know that was God. And God sent me back for a reason. And I have to believe that that reason is that he's the ultimate programmer, and that no matter what is thrown our way, that ultimately God will have the last say.
Jesse, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
You're welcome, and thank you for giving me this platform.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.